Ukraine now controls the skies in ways no one predicted. In 2022, Russia had one of the largest air forces in the world. Ukraine had fewer than 100 fighter jets and aging Soviet-era air defenses. On paper, the war for the skies should have been over in days. Instead, by 2024, Ukraine is intercepting over 83% of Russian missiles. They've taken out air defense systems worth hundreds of millions, and long-range drones are now striking Russian air bases over 1,000 kilometers away, destroying strategic bombers without even crossing the border. Russia's air defenses aren't holding, they're collapsing. What Ukraine has done isn't just a battlefield surprise, it's a revolution in modern air warfare, and it's changing everything. Let's take a closer look. The systematic destruction of Russian air defense systems reads like a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. According to open-source intelligence group Oryx, Ukrainian forces have visually confirmed the destruction of at least 18 S400 launchers, 3 radars, and 3 tractor vehicles since the war began. But these aren't just random lucky shots. Each was a remarkable achievement, slowly dismantling Russia's ability to pressure Ukraine by denying counterattacks. For example, in late June 2025, Ukraine's military intelligence agency, the HUR, announced a surgical strike that destroyed key components of Russia's S400 system in occupied Crimea, including 2 multifunctional fire control radars, 2 long-range surveillance radars, and 1 S400 launcher. This was a textbook demonstration of Ukraine's ability to strike the most advanced Russian air defense systems with pinpoint accuracy. The 91N6E Big Bird radars destroyed in these strikes are high-powered passive electronically scanned array or PACER radars capable of detecting stealth targets at high altitudes, essentially serving as the eyes of Russia's S400 network. Without these systems, the S400's ability to detect and engage targets at long ranges is fundamentally compromised, creating massive gaps in coverage that Ukrainian forces can then exploit. Ukraine has also successfully destroyed Russia's newer S-350 Vityaz systems, which are considered its most modern, medium-range air defense platform. Even more telling, some Russian S-350 systems have been lost to their own minefields, with one 50P6E transporter erector launcher accidentally driving into Russian mines and becoming unrecoverable. And in early June 2025, Ukraine launched Operation Spiderweb, the most audacious air attack in modern military history. Ukraine claimed the strikes damaged or destroyed roughly a third of Russia's strategic cruise missile-carrying bomber fleet. This was the pinnacle of planning and technical capabilities of Ukraine's drone fleet during the course of 3.5 years of war. The operation required 117 first-person view drones, which were smuggled into and then launched from trucks in Russian territory. Using those, Ukraine simultaneously struck 5 Russian air bases spanning 5 time zones. The operation reportedly took over 18 months to plan and was personally supervised by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, with drones transported in containers carried by trucks thousands of kilometers from Ukraine. The attack reached as far as the Belaya air base in Russia's Irkutsk region, more than 2,500 miles from Ukraine. This was the first time Ukrainian weapons had ever reached Siberia, demonstrating that practically nowhere was out of reach for Ukrainian ingenuity. The targeted Tu-95 and Tu-22M bombers are irreplaceable, as the production ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union, meaning every aircraft lost cannot be replaced. The scale of Ukraine's operations is twofold. First, there's the aforementioned precision strikes targeting vital pieces of Russian equipment, including both offensive and defensive pieces such as the aircraft and anti-air batteries. This has led to Russia practically pulling most of its aircraft to be used solely as glide bomb deployment units, rather than comprehensive surveillance or attack planes. But secondly, and more importantly, Ukraine has managed to target and destroy various munitions depots across Russia, denying it the opportunity to supply the front line and actually make the anti-air defenses useful. Out of 20 main missile and artillery directorate or GRAU facilities that are inside Russia, 7 are within 435 miles of the Ukraine-Russia border, and they were being targeted one by one with impunity. Depending on the scale of the damage and the storage capacities of the depots, this could basically cripple Russia's ability to continue its offensive ambitions inside Ukraine. The air defenses then became relatively useless. Since they arguably failed in defending some of the most important targets, they wouldn't serve much purpose beyond that, and that allows Ukraine to put even more pressure on Russian facilities and supply lines. But behind Russia's air defense failures lies a deeper crisis, the decimation of Russia's aerospace industry. While the details on military aircraft are much more difficult to come by, we can extrapolate some data from its civilian sector. Russia's civilian aircraft fleet consists of 994 aircraft that the country's manufacturers and maintenance crews are tasked with keeping afloat. However, Western sanctions have drastically cut Russia's ability to import vital parts and technology, preventing proper maintenance. This forces airlines to use planes long beyond their planned flight hours between service periods. But even worse, these aging aircraft are not being replaced. Russia previously announced an ambitious plan to produce over 1,000 domestic aircraft by 2030, including 270 MC-21s and 142 superjets, which would have made it one of the largest fleets in the world. However, this plan has been delayed for years. According to some reports, barely any aircraft have been produced over the past 3 years, despite Russia reportedly moving the goalposts from just over 1,000 down to slightly more than 990 aircraft to be built by 2030. The lack of progress means that Russia basically needs to start manufacturing aircraft at rates never seen before to keep up, or it's going to continue moving the goalposts. The military aviation picture can be gleaned from a RAND report, which claims the Russian Air Force was flying at less than 75% of its pre-war capacity in 2024. Russia is losing an estimated 60 aircraft annually just from overuse and lack of proper maintenance. At the same time, the same production difficulties are plaguing the civilian complex as well, with Russia reportedly only able to procure 23 new aircraft per year. Ukraine's emerging air superiority isn't just about destroying planes and air defenses. In a battle between modern forces, whoever controls the skies can ultimately control the ground. NATO itself operates on the principle that air superiority would be a given if it ever went into an actual war against a rival such as Russia. And as air defense has developed and improved, it's pushed manned combat aircraft to stand off distances that reduce their effectiveness. This means both sides have turned to artillery and kamikaze drones to support ground operations, while offensive operations are undercut by the absence of air superiority. But Ukraine's systematic destruction of Russian air defenses is changing this equation. By removing Russia's air defenses, Ukraine has been able to slowly leverage its bolstered air forces to conduct airstrikes on incoming mechanized infantry or even human wave attacks. The donated F-16s and Mirage 2000s from Europe have allowed Ukraine to keep pace with Russian aircraft and also utilize air-to-surface missiles to destroy roads surrounding the vital Donbas region. This has slowed Russia's rate of advance dramatically to 5.6 square miles per day. Compare this to the peak of Russia's initial invasion in March 2022, when they were able to seize approximately 46,000 square miles in less than 5 weeks. Ukraine's ability to strike anywhere in Russia with impunity has forced Moscow into an increasingly defensive posture. Take, for example, yet another recent strike, this time on the VNIIR Progress in Cheboksary, which produces Kometa antennas for Shahid drones and precision-guided weapons and is roughly 600 miles away from the Ukrainian border. Ukraine, despite being the smaller country, has been consistently able to project power deep into Russian territory, while Russia's ability to conduct effective air operations continues to degrade. Russian ground forces, lacking effective air cover and facing constant threat of precision strikes on their supply lines, are forced into increasingly passive positions. Ukraine's increasing air dominance has also become the ultimate bargaining chip for future peace negotiations, fundamentally altering the strategic balance that will determine any eventual settlement. Operation Spiderweb was disclosed on the same day that Zelensky announced Ukraine would send a delegation to Istanbul for direct peace talks with Russia. Some commentators and Russian military bloggers went so far as to call Operation Spiderweb Russia's Pearl Harbor. It was a stark message that Ukraine is willing to go far to negotiate from a position of strength. This is a similar strategy that Ukraine utilized by occupying and holding parts of Kursk for well over half a year. The more damage it can do to Russia, the more pressure Russia has from the political side of the conflict to retreat. Additionally, Ukraine's ability to conduct these strikes while dependent on NATO donations is mainly devised using domestic production capacities and strategic decisions. As such, each successful strike gives the West more confidence that Ukraine is worth backing, even if the result is the need to cut off Russia's plentiful gas and oil supply to the West, potentially causing widespread energy and heating disruptions. Now, you might be wondering how Ukraine actually managed to achieve this. Well, it's a combination of two major factors. One, Russian systems couldn't be perfect, as nothing is, allowing Ukraine to leverage these inherent weaknesses to gain an advantage. The S400 system, once hailed as one of the world's more sophisticated air defense systems, has proven vulnerable to attacks it should theoretically handle with ease. The system's 91N6E radar, capable of detecting targets at ranges up to 360 miles, might be too focused on tracking targets high up, which would be traditional stealth fighters and bombers, creating blind spots for aerial vehicles hugging the ground, as drones naturally do. Then the Russian air defense doctrine relies on layered systems working in coordination. However, if you take one piece apart, it also doesn't come with a fallback plan to adapt to the loss. Take, for example, the aforementioned 92N2E multifunction radars, which provide target acquisition and tracking and represent single points of failure. Once Ukraine could manage to destroy these, the entire S400 battery became effectively blind. This underscores one important factor about Ukraine's military doctrine. It's a seamless combination of Russian and Western strategies. Ukraine's military strategists and senior engineers are more than likely intimately familiar with Soviet equipment such as the S300 and its upgrades. After all, the systems were built by the Soviet Union as a whole, and Ukraine was one of the members with the most military equipment by the end of it. Even more telling is Russia's response to these vulnerabilities. Satellite imagery shows Russian Tu-95 and Tu-160 bombers at air bases covered with old tires in an improvised defense against drone strikes. But not all aircraft were fitted with them. In some cases, Russia resorted to painting the fuselage in darker schemes to serve as optical camouflage, or even to act as decoys meant to trick attackers into wasting munitions. Instead of robust protection, Moscow is relying on visual tricks and patchwork defenses to shield some of its most valuable aircraft. The technical disparity becomes even more stark when examining Ukraine's drone technology. While Russian propaganda claimed the S400's advanced tracking systems could detect and destroy multiple threats simultaneously, Operation Spiderweb demonstrated that coordinated swarms of small, low-flying drones can overwhelm these sophisticated networks or bypass them entirely. Russia's situation has gotten this bad simply because it started to suffer economically due to a significant increase in funding going to the military instead of the industry that backs it. But even that creates a disparity where Russia is spending money on equipment that is simply ineffective against Ukraine's threats. Consider the mathematics. A cluster of $600 or $1,000 drones are destroying strategic bombers. The cost exchange ratios here are through the roof. By comparison, a single interceptor missile for the Patriot or similar systems, which would ordinarily be used for the task when being attacked by said aircraft, can cost around $3.7 million. And the bombers destroyed cost not several but possibly dozens of millions to procure. Even accounting for the extensive intelligence and logistics support required for operations like Spiderweb, the economic advantage remains overwhelming. A single successful drone strike can eliminate military assets that would take Russia years and billions of dollars to replace, assuming they can even be replaced given current sanctions. The broader economic impacts extend far beyond individual weapon systems. Each destroyed S400 battery represents not just the loss of a $500 million system, but the degradation of Russia's entire integrated air defense network. When Ukraine destroys key radar components, it creates gaps in coverage that force Russia to either accept vulnerabilities or redeploy other systems, creating cascading weaknesses across the entire front. These cost money, time, and manpower to bypass, and Russia is starting to run out on all fronts. And this is with Russia having highly inflated military spending. Russia's military budget for 2025 allocates roughly 40% of government spending, or a staggering 7.5% of GDP, to defense. Yet this massive investment is being systematically negated by Ukrainian innovations that cost a fraction to develop and deploy. This economic disparity has become so painfully obvious to Russia that President Vladimir Putin announced a lower budget for 2026, clearly signaling a lack of progress and internal capacities to keep the war going. Of course, there's another factor in play: economic sanctions and trading difficulties. Russia's primary source of revenue, oil and gas sales, is taking hit after hit with each sanction wave. China was already getting a bargain on Russian exports, and now Russia needs to expend more resources on its shadow fleet rather than legitimate tankers to transport oil and gas across the world. As such, oil and gas revenues plummeted 25% below expectations by April 2025. Ukrainian drone production, in contrast, operates on an entirely different economic model. The distributed network of over 500 suppliers, ranging from major companies to garage workshops, creates redundancy and cost efficiency that traditional military-industrial complexes cannot match. When one workshop discovers an improvement, that information gets shared across the entire network within days through systems like the Delta Information Coordination Platform. This is why Ukraine's military technology advancement is measured in weeks and months rather than the years needed for traditional procurement. Russia's crisis also extends far beyond aerospace and energy trade, seeping into every sector of its military-industrial complex. Russia's inability to produce precision machinery domestically means that every advanced weapons system depends on imported components that sanctions have made increasingly difficult to obtain. At the same time, Russian companies are facing incredible pressure from the government. Strapped for money, the government is buying military equipment and signing contracts at prices most companies simply can't operate under for long. This stems from the simple fact that Russian manufacturing has also become centralized and dependent on the existing regime. With the government being the largest client, many companies are faced with contracts that actually don't cover the manufacturing costs at all. Essentially, the Russian government is forcing some companies to operate at a loss, laying off staff to make up for the dwindling revenue. This further cements the growing manpower crisis. Russian state media itself has suggested that the military-industrial complex is facing a severe shortage of engineers, with Yuri Borisov, Manturov's predecessor, claiming up to 120,000 engineers will be needed to keep up the offensive efforts. The total manpower shortfall is estimated to be around 400,000. The metallurgy sector faces similar constraints. Russian companies like joint stock company Novotroitsky Zavod Gromvosoyedineni, which produces chromium compounds essential for advanced alloys, operate under severe restrictions that limit their ability to source foreign technology and components. This creates a cascading effect where even basic materials become difficult to produce at the quality levels required for modern military equipment. This has resulted in quality becoming a systemic problem across Russian military production. Without an avenue of high-quality materials, Russia is forced to substitute them with local manufacturing, which is simply not up to the task. Combine this with Russia also needing to import vital equipment such as artillery ammunition from North Korea or Shahid drones from Iran, and its equipment could just stop working altogether. This is not so impossible, given that some estimates suggest roughly half of Korean munitions simply do not work. But the effects of Ukraine's successes are being seen far beyond Russia, forcing military analysts from NATO, China, and the Middle East to reconsider how wars could be fought in the 21st century. The traditional model of air superiority, i.e. gaining control of airspace through fighter aircraft and surface-to-air missiles, has been completely upended. Traditional air defense systems were designed to intercept fighter aircraft and ballistic missiles, singular targets high in the air that present an immediate threat. Instead, we've seen the emergence of a lower-altitude domain where small drones operate in a new battlefield space, one that traditional military doctrines have barely addressed thus far. Ukraine has demonstrated that small, inexpensive drones can achieve strategic effects against some of the most sophisticated air defense systems currently in existence. NATO military planners have started teaming up with Ukrainian engineers to develop these concepts further and bring them to domestic national defense systems. The result? Traditional air defense systems have struggled against swarms of small, intelligent drones that can coordinate attacks and adapt to countermeasures in real time. NATO's reliance on barely stealth aircraft like the F-16, Rafale, and Typhoon is also being questioned as Ukraine demonstrates that sophisticated air defense systems can threaten these platforms when properly deployed. The developments suggest that only low observable aircraft like the F-35, paired with advanced electronic warfare capabilities, may be able to overcome these systems. That is, if the entire conflict doesn't immediately start revolving around drones. Then there are the economic implications. If Ukrainian methods can be scaled up to provide security for multiple national defense organizations such as NATO, traditional military-industrial approaches that cost billions to develop and deploy single-weapon systems may become obsolete. The Pentagon is already rushing to deploy countermeasures for small drone threats, purchasing systems like the Coyote Interceptor at $100,000 a pop. And even this cost is prohibitive when every encounter is a possible drone swarm of cheap, readily replaceable drones. European defense establishments may need to reassess their entire approach to military technology development. The traditional model of centralized, government-led development programs lasting decades appears obsolete when compared to Ukraine's distributed innovation networks that can iterate and improve systems in months. As mentioned, lessons learned in Ukraine naturally extend to conflicts beyond Europe. A potential Taiwan conflict now includes scenarios where dozens of naval drones might be waiting off the coast, both above and underwater. China's military planners must now consider whether their air defense investments can handle the types of asymmetric threats that have proven so effective against Russia. Taiwan itself is implementing a porcupine defense that looks similar to that of Ukraine. All the while, China is still considered behind the US in terms of sheer technological advancements for weapons. It remains to be seen just how effective Ukraine's aerial denial tactics are going to be on the grand scale of the war. While Ukraine is scoring significant tactical victories, the overall numbers are simply not on its side. If Russia does manage to extend the war of attrition, Ukraine might at one point lose the momentum, manpower, and money needed to continue its efforts. Of course, there's another possibility, that Russia collapses under its own faults. With crises mounting one after another, Putin's place as the head of state is in jeopardy. If his underlings get a whiff that he's no longer representing Russia's best interests both outwardly and domestically, there's a chance that they may oust him. Given that there's no clear succession procedure, Russia itself might fall apart. Until then, the world will be watching Ukraine and Russia as they play out a real-life reenactment of a David versus Goliath story. Thanks for watching, and to find out exactly what the extent of Ukraine's drones' capabilities are, check out this video. And to stay up to date with the war and all matters of global geopolitics, subscribe to The Military Show for daily videos.